Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Osterhout, the executive producer here at Lincoln Square, and I'm so excited for this conversation today. My guest is a rising star in Democratic politics and one of the most interesting people in the party right now, in my humble opinion. Anna Eskamani is a state representative from Orlando, the first Iranian-American ever elected to office in Florida, and she's running to be Orlando's next mayor. She's the daughter of two Iranian immigrants who met working at a donut shop, as I understand it. I want to talk about that for sure. She has spent her career refusing to wait her turn. We're talking on a remarkable day that also happens to be her birthday. I hope I didn't out you on that. But it's also a remarkable time in the country. Anna Eskamani, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I want to get into Florida politics. I mean, I actually don't want to get into Florida politics because it's a crazy world. But I want to get into your bio a little bit first. As the story goes, your mom heard your dad's accent and started speaking Farsi to him. What did they think Orlando could give them and their kids that Iran couldn't at that time?
It's a really beautiful question. My parents were actually about 10 years apart in age as well. And my dad was really shy to talk about his cultural origin for fear of discrimination. And as you noted, my mom was the opposite. And she recognized that accent. If you know any Persian, it's a very specific accent that kind of exactly. I mean, it sounds like poetry. I mean, it's always so sweet. It's a very almost like musical accent. And so, the rest was history. But both of my parents chose Orlando for the fact that it's a small town with big dreams, and it's one that really welcomes and honors the working class. I mean, I would say that there's a lot more to do in that regard, in the sense of we're today failing the working class, but historically, when you think about the service-driven economy, it is just everyday people that are working day in and day out to deliver memories for visitors across the world. And so that work takes a lot of heart. It takes a lot of grit. And that's the family that I grew up in. Both of my parents worked in retail and service and, some of these everyday economies that are historically undervalued and yet so essential, especially in a state like Florida. And it just gave me this deep sense of appreciation for hard work, but also understanding that so many everyday Floridians never get a fair shake. And my parents were an example of that. And unfortunately, my mom passed away to colon cancer after a long, courageous battle with it in 2004. And so her story really is foundational to my story. And both of my parents are incredible role models in the context of giving with that expectation and prioritizing family and giving everything you got to the people around you. And I just aspire every day to have that same level of courage and tenacity.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who knows Iranians or Persians in the United States knows how tenacious and hardworking and aspirational y'all are. I got a couple of Persian kids myself, and I feel a little tired often.
Yeah, gotta keep up.
Yeah, I gotta keep up, and I cannot. So I want to turn to Orlando a little bit, and again to Florida. You've been floated for governor, for Congress, for the Senate, but you picked mayor of Orlando. And I think that was a big surprise to a lot of people. So I'm wondering, why is running Orlando the bigger job right at this moment?
Oh, so well stated in the context of opportunities before in my case, before over the years before me, in the sense of, do I stay in the legislature? Do I embark on a new chapter in the federal level or something statewide?
Right.
And I do think it's important, especially when we're trying to build a bench in the Democratic Party, to be strategic in how we move forward and where our position of influence lie. And I've thought about this a lot, if you can't tell, because I'm so blessed to have folks who give me so much love and encouragement and confidence, and have, ridden these trajectories for me in different capacities. And with that, and that same note in mind, I also had, back in college at the University of Central Florida, this amazing government teacher my senior year at UCF, and it was my first A-. And you can imagine how crushing that felt, for someone like my type A personality.
Yeah.
And he told me that you're a bright star, Eskamani, but bright stars can burn out really fast. And so that's always stuck with me too, in the context of really just vibrant and talented and charismatic people that in my lived experience come to legislature, and then they have a new opportunity that's quite consequential. They jump at it, they don't make it, and you don't really see them anymore. You just don't, because once you lose that bully pulpit, it's very difficult to maintain relevancy. Not impossible. I mean, obviously other politicians have done it, but it is challenging. If you don't have the ability to, for example, in my case, if I have a constituent with a challenge with unemployment or housing assistance or property insurance, I can easily contact that corporation. I can easily contact that agency, and I can get a result. It's just harder to do that when you're not in that position of elected capacity. And so I've made measured decisions in my 8 years. I'm also someone who, once I start something, I don't like to stop. I really like to see it through. So I had this instinctive desire to finish my 8 years in the Florida legislature, to give it all I had, to balance, by the way, a full-time job on top of being in the legislature, because in Florida, the salary is a part-time salary. But doing all of that simultaneously to help build up my expertise, my relationships, and to really prove to people of all political backgrounds that I got your back. And I'm proud to say that in our district, we actually won 2 precincts that voted for President Trump in the last election cycle. And it just speaks to the type of politics that we practice, which is not one about ego. It's not one that heavily leans into party tension. For me, it's not about left versus right. It's about the bottom reaching for the top and making sure everyone pays what they owe and contributes to our collective prosperity. And that's a values-driven approach that has broad appeal. Now, with that said, thinking about opportunities like running for governor have always been on the table. And I don't think they're off the table for the future. But I think as a young millennials in the Democratic Party, we have such a unique opportunity to prove our ability to lead in an executive capacity and to solve problems at a city level, which really have become some of the most important guardrails between freedom and fascism. And if we can prove our leadership skills, our management skills, our executive skills at this level, then that sets us up for success when we run for that next executive opportunity. But I'm sensing this larger scale transition, especially for millennials, where folks have naysayers have attempted to pin us in a place of just activism and rhetoric. And we've been proving them wrong from the beginning, but I do think seeing that transition to having an executive role and to being effective and to building teams that will solve problems, it just nullifies that type of feedback. So when we make that leap to something like governor and something like president, it's not going to feel so out of reach. And so that's what motivates me. That's what excites me. And obviously, the city of Orlando is my hometown. I mean, I'm born and raised here. We are a growing city, but also a young city. So we're still malleable. We can build our next future, our next chapter together. And most folks look at cities and think about the importance of making sure the trains run on time, trash pickup, public safety. I'm a firm believer in building new tracks. And so I want to see cities champion addressing the affordability crisis, providing access to childcare, ensuring access to public transportation to alleviate the daily costs for an everyday Floridian. And I have no doubt that everything we do in Orlando is going to set a tone for cities across the state and across the country. So that's why I'm running for mayor, and that's why I'm so excited about it.
And that's an incredible answer. And there's a lot in there. And I think, Democrats have historically sort of ceded ground that they didn't think was winnable, right? And that means not just mayorships, but, city councils and dog catcher and librarian and city and school board and all of this, that, and the other. And you're right. I think, the average age of our both houses is something like 67. And right. And so we do need a stable of up and comers who know how to actually govern. And I'm Buddy Dyer has been mayor there since 2003. Your opponent, Tony Ortiz, has been city commissioner since 2008. He's a former Orlando cop. And you are running as an outsider, but a really well-known outsider, at least nationally and within the state. And your average donation has been something like $23. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been great. And we've already delivered like 850 yard signs in the city of Orlando. And so we do really try to run that grassroots campaign. We've knocked on 40,000 doors. We've raised more than $1 million. And I should mention too, good leaders help to train new leaders.
Right.
And Maxwell Frost is one of those examples. Congressman Frost. He's my congressman and also my friend. When Maxwell was thinking of running for Congress, I was one of the first people that he called. And of course, there were folks that wanted me to run for that congressional seat. But I knew that my responsibility is to help build new leaders, and to have someone like the first ever Gen Z member of Congress from Orlando is remarkable. And I knew it would set us up for national success in the context of Orlando leading the way. And Congressman Frost has just been so remarkable in his leadership. But that's also part of my responsibility, right? To your earlier point,
Sure.
I can't just center myself in the political landscape. I have to help make sure that more folks that align with my values are also in place of decision making, because we can't do this alone. And we've been able to shift the county commission by electing really strong, progressively minded county commissioners that are challenging corporate greed, challenging the status quo. They're not demonizing different actors, but they're holding firm on their values and helping to prove that their success does not have to be tied to someone else's failure, that politics doesn't have to be a zero-sum game.
Sure.
And so we're kind of building that ecosystem in Orlando as well. And again, I couldn't do that if I was just always thinking about, me and my future. I have to think about us and our future. And I do think that there's more and more just elected officials, especially in Central Florida, despite being in a state like Florida, where
Right.
often we're not in the headlines for good reason. Central Florida has really been an outlier.
So, you talked about Orlando and how quickly it's growing. It by some counts, it added almost 150,000 people in a single year, which is bananas. That is crazy. It's one of the fastest growing metros in the country. But there is an affordability crisis that comes out of that, and a homelessness crisis. Is Orlando growing in a way that's pushing out the folks like your parents who built it? What are the numbers here that keep you up at night and that you're really focused on once you take office?
All the numbers. I mean, the overwhelming majority of Orlando residents are rent burdened. We're also a very large renter population. I'm a renter myself. And we have huge stagnation among wages, partly because we keep feeding legacy industries. And so, you mentioned growth. The jobs that grow the most in Florida, including Central Florida, tend to be those minimum wage or low wage jobs. And they're essential jobs, as I mentioned, tourism, service jobs, also CNAs, for example, because we do have an aging population and we attract an aging population. We don't have the workforce to support that aging population. And part of the challenge too is that Florida has really become a tax haven with beachside view for uber wealthy individuals that come to relocate to our state, but they're not contributing to any type of revenue because we don't tax income. And that's one reason why people love coming to Florida, but it also means that you have a very aggressive tax structure that you have to find ways to balance it out. We also, of course, have seen homelessness increase. We're no longer, we were once at a near zero for veterans homelessness, not the case anymore. Those are the statistics that keep me up at night. Those are the ones that push me to work late into the evening and wake up extra early, because it does require creative solutions to address. And it's worth noting too that the economic incentive model, when we try to lure in these headquarters to relocate, it's not really relevant anymore in the greater scheme of how a workforce operates today. So many of the highest paying jobs are remote. And so it's not so much attracting an HQ as it is attracting the talent. And millennials in particular have been leaving the state of Florida in droves. We have seen it in multiple sectors of the economy, and it's often due to two main issues: culture and quality of life / cost of living. When you think about just the culture wars in Florida, there really has been an unfortunate demonization of diversity. So many everyday Floridians don't feel safe, and if they have the resources to leave, they have and they will. And then, of course, when you think about just quality of life and cost of living, you can make more in a different state, or even make about the same, but pay a lot less. And so I have friends that are leaving to the Midwest in droves because they just see that they have a better quality of life there and better opportunities there. And that's on us to help correct. That's on us to help address. And I think when you have younger leaders in places of decision making, we're the demographic that's most impacted by this. We also know what millennials and Gen Zers want. They want public transportation. They want different types of living environments like infill and density. They don't necessarily want to live in sprawl neighborhoods that are disconnected from one another. And that's the type of growth that I want to see, is one that's smart, but also planned around public transportation. I don't want to see more one-story buildings and infill. We should always do mixed use. We should incentivize developers to really leverage that lot to its maximum capacity, because at the end of the day, the affordability crisis is not going to get addressed if we can't build up that housing stock. But it has to be housing stock built that also protects our environment and helps our city stay connected.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the rise of remote work seems to be lost on the older generation, just how impactful and essential that piece is to all of. I mean, I know a few people who go to an office, but right,
every major global company now, part of their benefits package, if you will, is remote options. I mean, I have so many friends that they work for California-based companies but live in Florida, and it's just it's so important for us to be aware and embrace these disruptors while mitigating harm. And again, I think about Waymo as an example. So the state of Florida has preempted autonomous vehicles, meaning a local government cannot prevent Waymo from operating in your jurisdiction. However, we can work to reduce harm, and we also can work to prepare for job loss and to leverage the company to help with the job loss, right? To create an ecosystem where they participate in that effort. They help cover the cost of scaling up jobs. And you need to have elected officials that understand that reality, that understand also the public's opinions. I mean, I'm so shocked. Maybe I shouldn't be shocked, but there's been so many university commencements, my alma mater being one of them, that had a pro AI speaker or used AI in some capacity, and everyone boos, everyone's upset. And it's just so tone deaf, right? But also speaks to how we're living in such different realities. And I think a lot of us, especially younger and more politically connected folks, we're seeing the pushback to AI in our social media and our everyday lives. But if you're not getting that same content, you're oblivious to it. You're using it every day and thinking that it's totally popular and fine. And so you need elected officials that are down to earth and just connected to that, to understand where is the public's position on this, and to also create opportunities for public engagement versus making assumptions, which I think that's one of the worst elements of the Democratic Party over the past decade, has been making assumptions about what women want, about people of color, about immigrants, and just being oblivious to the notion of, why don't you ask? And why don't you show up without speaking and just listening, right? And I do think that's a part of a shift among younger Democratic leaders.
Well, you see that in the Democratic strategists who are so surprised by Zoran Mamdani, right, and his rise, and the lesson that even the center right folks took was exactly that lesson that he asked people what they wanted. That was the magic. That was the magic that he found.
Right. And he's
so dumb.
representing it and speaking to it. Like he's
Yes.
doing something about it. Yeah. Like he's relatable. I mean, and I think also what's so interesting is, and I experienced this without even trying, but I barely mention Trump in a day. Like I mean, obviously I have to combat his policies. I have to mitigate harm of his policies, but this is a political ideologue that takes up so much oxygen out of the room that I would much rather address everyday problems and try to make your life better to hopefully pull you away from that extremism that is often leveraging economic turmoil to exploit people. I would rather address the turmoil so that you're not as vulnerable to that than focus on my energy on just, clapping back to every crazy thing he says. I mean, I wouldn't have time to do anything else if that was the case. But I think that people are just really fatigued by always being reactive versus proactive. And I have strived to find bipartisan opportunities. Working as a member of the super minority caucus in the legislature means that you have to get good at the art of persuasion. You have to be able to have multiple dialogue and conversations with someone to get them to agree with you versus assume that'll happen with one swoop. And that's an approach that I take with me in the legislature, but also every day on the ground when I meet with folks that are of very different political backgrounds than I, but we still can agree on some, very important hyper local issues.
Well, and I think, look, I'm in political media and I say the word Trump so many times that I feel rotten inside, but he has done this sort of magic trick of taking the cultural wedge issues and actually applying them in real life to communities like yours. And you fought alligator Alcatraz, right? You helped force the closure of that terrible place. And a mayor doesn't control ICE, but a mayor does have power. We've seen it in Portland. We've seen it in Minneapolis. Yep. What's your take, and what's the most aggressive thing you could actually legally do to protect, the undocumented in your own city?
Oh, that's such a great question. There's actually a lot of tools available to us to mitigate harm. So first of all, I believe firmly that it is a misnomer that municipalities in the state of Florida have to sign on a 287G agreement. I penned an op-ed for my local newspaper about this last year. The way the statute reads is that it says best effort to cooperate, but it doesn't say you have to sign on to 287G agreements. And so I think that is an arena that absolutely needs to be explored in the context of why do we train 10% of OPD officers under this agreement and that they're basically cooperating and complying to ICE when that's from the perspective of analyzing statute not legally required. So I think that alone is important to just not have these contracts, right? But there's also the effort of providing access to legal aid. ICE has intentionally targeted working class people because they cannot afford representation. Right. And once they end up in a detention facility, and I've done a lot of work in this arena, unfortunately, they ask you every day to self-deport. So, I mean, the tactic really is pick up folks that are working class, no criminal background, beyond that, they don't have an ID. That's usually the reason why they get brought to a jail and then tagged by ICE and brought to a detention facility. And while they're delayed in processing because they don't have enough judges and et cetera, every day they just put a terrible environment that you're in and they ask you to self-deport. And then, of course, they target the breadwinner of families to push women and children to leave on their own as well. So what we can do is ensure that you have legal representation, that we have nonprofits like Orlando Center for Justice that with more resources could really scale up their work and have hotlines and so forth to make sure that at least you know what your options are and that there's a path forward of support. I'm, of course, a firm believer in Know Your Rights workshops and red cards and working with our nonprofit partners and all those efforts. And I also think it's important to over communicate to your constituents, right, on what we know about, for example, it was leaked to me and I was able to get it to press partners that a warehouse was potentially being observed by ICE to convert into a detention facility that is still on the table. I mean, with Kristi Noem gone, there's been a pause on these warehouse conversions, but we're still very much building pressure against this. But this is why, again, having a strong city mayor is important, because my opposition to that detention facility, obviously I have a values-based opposition to it, but as we've seen with the environmental lawsuit challenging the Everglades detention facility, it's more effective to work on an angle pertaining to zoning and water usage and utility usage and traffic than it is to just lean on your more ideological values. You have to understand the ins and outs of local government to leverage those tools to prevent those types of facilities opening up in your backyard. And unfortunately, our mayor, basically the city council and the mayor put their hands up and just said, based on the supremacy clause, there's nothing we can do. And they never asked the question about zoning or traffic or et cetera, et cetera. And so you need city officials and mayors that are willing to ask those tough questions, to put their political capital on the line, to not only defend their communities, but to uphold what they campaigned on in the first place.
Yeah, it does seem like, and I want to wrap up in a second, but it does seem like, so much of the political elite, and particularly the MAGA Republicans at every level, ultimately every problem that they're approached with is too hard. It's just too hard, right? And what you're saying is it's not too hard. You just have to do your diligence. I want to sort of end with this. We talked about your parents. You're the daughter of immigrants from Iran, running on the American dream, right? And we're in a spot that is hostile to immigrants, to immigration. We are losing footing globally. Is the dream of your parents still real for a family living in Orlando?
Ooh, thank you for this question. I don't feel it is right now. I really don't. I mean, especially if I've met so many moms and so many dads that are struggling. I've used my own money to help folks. This morning I sent a donation to the Young Fathers of Central Florida organization for their upcoming Father's Day event. It's, you just try to show up as much as you can in all the ways, but the need has only gotten worse and worse over the past 2 decades. And whether it's lack of government intervention, whether it's corporate monopolies, whether it is an overemphasis on low wage jobs and a lack of securing safety nets, we've made it ever more difficult for an everyday person, whether they're a citizen or not, to thrive in this community. Unless you have some sort of insider knowledge, it's very, very difficult. And that's what we're trying to change. That's why it's important to elect people that come from those everyday experiences, that have not been bought before they walk into the door, and care. People who despise poverty, but care so deeply about those who are poor. Like, you need to elect those types of everyday people. That's the only way the dream is going to be protected and secured and accessible to everyone.
So no more billionaires? Is that what you're saying?
I think it was Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez who mentioned this, but the reality is that billionaires only exist because of rigged systems that rewarded their behavior. The fact that you have billionaires that are barely paying anything in taxation, and of course the recent IRS controversy with President Trump. It should disgust all of us. It should disgust all of us. The crony capitalism and the rig system that continues to choose winners and losers and does not operate on merit at all. And it's important, again, to have candidates that are not just bending over backwards to please corporate interest. I take a lot of pride in not raising money from the theme park industry, sugar, big ag, utility companies. But I will tell you, it's stressful to do the type of fundraising that I'm doing because I've separated myself from that status quo. It's harder for us to raise money, but I do think it gives us the type of flexibility and just ethical standing that people appreciate.
And it just proves who you serve.
Absolutely.
Right? Tell us where we can find out more.
Well, we are still very active on Anna for Florida. So you can always find us on all the main social media platforms, Anna for Florida, all spelled out with 2 N's. And of course, our newer platforms are Anna for Orlando. And you can sign up for our newsletter and volunteer opportunities and donate at annafororlando.com.
Amazing. Anna Eskamani is the state rep from Orlando, the first Iranian-American ever elected to office in Florida. And she's running to be Orlando's next mayor. Anna Eskamani, thanks for joining. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.